Welcome to the Dev Ready podcast, where we're helping non-techs build better tech. Today, we're talking about one of the biggest topics that every business needs to be on top of. It's all about sales today. And we're fortunate enough to have Rashid Cotwell, who's joining us. Rashid is a sales coach and mentor, helps sales teams predominantly be more proficient, more profitable in their actions as a sales team. So, Rashid, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Andrew and Anthony. Great to be here.
First and foremost, Rashid, tell us a little bit about your background, your history, and why you've come to us today and talking about sales predominantly.
All right. So effectively, I'm a sales coach and business strategist who you could think of me as a guide who helps you navigate an organization's buying process. My history is I spent 20 years in IT working for the likes of NCR, DEC, Unisys, Concurrent, all of those sorts of people, starting in very technical roles and then moving into sales and then senior management. And then when the dot-com era came along, the organization I was with tried to get a whole bunch of venture capital and eventually failed. And so I shut the door on that chapter of my life. And by that stage, I was either too old, too senior, or too general. And nobody in the IT world wanted to hire me at the salary that I was used to. So basically, you do what all people like us do. We put up a shingle and became consultants, which is a rather interesting journey. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to most people starting out.
It is a different journey, definitely, because all of a sudden you do everything, not just the one thing that you're really good at. That's probably my biggest learning in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, basically over the 20 years, we moved from being, let's just say, generalists who were business consultants into specializing more and more into the marketing and sales area, because as you would well know, nothing happens until somebody buys something.
Correct. In terms of, you mentioned there a little bit about buying process. So in terms of your target clients that you predominantly work with, can you describe a little bit about them? And a buying process is generally considered maybe a little bit of a bigger ticket item where it goes through multiple stakeholders, etc. Tell me about who you might work with.
Okay, our ideal clients range from organizations that have 5 people up to about 50 people. They may have a sales team, or it may be the founder owner who does most of the sales. The people that they target tend to be either businesses which are mid-size all the way up to corporate. The issues that they face are generally long sales cycles, being able to target the right people, being able to get the message out correctly in a way that actually cuts through to a target market, and not going into that merry-go-round of, yes, this will close, oh, it's going to close at some point, but it never does. All of the sorts of stuff that we used to see constantly when I was in sales in the corporate arena, we see in the small business arena. But in the small business arena, you don't have that level of time, and you can't hide. In a large organization, salespeople can hide, and you can talk about, oh, this deal will close at some point, but it doesn't work that way in a small business. And most of our clients are relatively small businesses. That means if you don't sell, you don't eat.
Yes, I feel that. We're probably in a business where myself and Anthony run most of the sales and upfront stuff, and get that, and it's all driven by 1 or 2 people. A lot of businesses are in that sort of frame. So describe what are some of the important areas you might want to focus on within sales. You mentioned long buying cycles. Now, how do we dwindle them away potentially to, instead of 6 months, 2? How does someone do that? Would be probably one of my pivotal questions.
Well, it always comes down to people buy when they're ready to buy, not when you need to make a sale. And I think the mistake that most organizations make is that they target people who are not necessarily ready to buy something. So if you look at, think of it like an iceberg. You've got a small percentage of people who are up there, say maybe 3 to 5%, who are actively looking for something. They know they've got a problem, and if you target them, you can demonstrate that and explain the problem that they've got to themselves better than they themselves understand it. then they feel that you understand them, and they are more likely to want to take action to solve the problem. Whereas if you don't target people who are ready to make a buying decision, that's when the long sales cycles start. Now, that also depends, of course, on how many people are involved in the buying decision. So if you've got a lot of people buying in the buying decision, you've got to realize that there are multiple agendas at play. And we usually see this when you're making a pitch to the business, but you need some form of IT buy-in, or other people have to buy in. And what generally happens is that people don't want to do more work, or they feel that their jobs are at risk because, hey, you're coming in and you're going to do this thing that I, as the IT department, should have been able to do. And very often the deal will get kiboshed because of that. So what we always inculcate into our clients is that the smaller the organization, the closer the personal interests of the owner of the organization and the company. What's good for you as an owner is good for the company. But the bigger the organization, the greater the disparity. So if, it could be in the best interest of the company to go down with this solution, but somebody's status, somebody's job is at risk, and they will actually kibosh the deal rather than pushing it through. And we see that a lot. And so part of what we do is to figure out how you figure out who's who in the zoo and what their own personal agendas are, and how you could make it to be in their best interest to move the sale forward, because that is the thing that kills most deals.
So trying to help them rather than give them more work.
Yeah. How can ultimately we all buy things because, we want more money, more time, some form of status and recognition, and some form of lifestyle. Okay. In a corporate environment, it usually comes down to some form of status, believe it or not. Is this thing going to be a risk for my job, or is this thing going to enhance my career? What's going to happen if it doesn't work?
Yeah, there's a lot of risk taken by those people that are, especially with something new. And a lot of people are afraid of the new. You only get that the person that's really putting their job on the line, and they are, if they're investing big money into new tech, new ways of doing things. It is a status thing. They like to be seen as doing new, but if it doesn't come off, then it can be a bit of a risk to them as well.
Yeah.
In terms of understanding each person, so getting an understanding of who's who in the zoo, as you mentioned it, what's some of the tactics that you might put at play to get pretty much every stakeholder at the table? Because sometimes businesses don't open up stakeholders. Someone might be a gatekeeper and they might not open up the tree at the top, and they just may sort of pass information through. What's some of the strategies you might put in to just open up some of those stakeholders?
Look, there is no easy answer to this. You do need to understand people and what might be motivating them. And it's really helpful if you're familiar with any of the Miller-Hyman type models, where you have a coach, which is somebody who knows the organization or knows some of the players that can say, okay, well, maybe this is going on over there, or this could be happening for them. But if you also understand the types of sales that you're involved in and the types of issues that these people normally come up with that block you, then you can have a frank conversation off to the side. You would never bring this up in front of their boss, but you'd say, okay, now how do I help you look good so that this thing is a win-win for everybody? So it's got to be a three-way win. It's got to be a win for that particular individual, what they stand to win or lose. It's got to be a win for the organization, and it's got to be a win for you, the business that's actually promoting the sale. And if it's not that three-way win, then that sale will never progress. And sometimes it's a matter of just asking the question, hey, look, what would get this thing over the line for you personally? How would this help you do something? And that maybe get a promotion, and the promotion means more money, or it saves them some time, it gives them takes away some headache. What is in it for them? And sometimes you just have to ask.
I think, some people are just afraid to ask those type of questions. I think, yeah, when you're dealing at a business, you can just look at what does it do for the business. But in fact, we're dealing with people. Every day we're talking to people and human beings, and they've got their own agendas. And the reason why they're talking to you is because they're trying to solve an issue or fill a gap or whatever it might be, add value in a certain way. So I agree. It's how do we help that person at the other end of the line?
Sometimes they're a bit cagey though, and they don't really want to answer the questions that you need them to answer.
Yeah, that can happen
Look,
too.
that's always the case, but that always comes down to building up a level of trust, and that comes from building up a relationship. And when they understand that, hey, listen, you are actually on their side, rather than, so this is not a confrontation. This is not a, I win, you lose. This has got to be, I'm on your side, and let's see how we can help you and the business that you represent get a result. And also, the other factor is, depending on how much work there is involved in actually implementing this thing, people will say, okay, look, there's too much work involved here, and I'm actually happy with the status quo. I know what I've got. So this is all about removing barriers. What are the barriers that I need to remove to get the sale? So it's not about winning the deal. It's actually very often removing barriers to the deal.
Yeah, what's going to stop it from going through?
Sales is one thing, but first and foremost, what are some of the strategies we get into the door? People look at mass marketing, cold calling. What are some of the things that we might do to actually get our brand out there, our products out there, into front of these businesses before the cold sale, for example?
And probably, identifying that there is a clear difference between the two.
Okay, so in our world, marketing and sales are two sides of the same coin. And if you think of marketing is basically a one-to-many operation where you send stuff out into the world. And marketing's job is to basically raise awareness and then warm somebody up. So that in an ideal world, they're going to see your marketing material. They're going to go, oh, this is really interesting. This thing, triggers something in me with there's a problem that I have, and I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call you. That's an ideal world. Okay. Now, if the marketing is done correctly and a person is actually looking for a solution and they find you, statistically today, they're probably 60 to 70% down the buying funnel where they've done their research before they pick up the phone and contact you. And if you think about it this way, if you were, regardless of what you were buying, whether you were buying another phone, whether you were buying a washing machine, or you're buying a car, the chances are you're probably going to go online. You're going to search for what's out there. You're going to, do your research and then phone a vendor. And it's no different in our world. So it always comes down to how well you can position yourself and educate your potential market as to who you are, what you do, why they should buy from you, and why they should buy from you now. And so marketing's job is to basically is to educate and nurture somebody until the point is that they either raise their hands and come to you. But that's only the tip of the iceberg. That's only the people who are actively looking. And that might be whatever it is, 3%, 5% of your market. But there's a whole bunch under the surface who are not actively looking, whereas if you identified them and said, hey, listen, I know that this particular type of organization is likely to have these 3 or 4 problems. Pick up the phone, send an email saying, hey, listen, when I work with organizations like yours, I typically see one of these 3 or 4 problems. If any of those are on your radar, is it worthwhile having a conversation? It's as short as that. Okay?
It requires you understanding that customer, right? That's a preface here. We need to actually understand our customers before we...
You have to understand your customer. This is not about picking up the white pages and, just dialing and hoping like hell that something's going to happen. It doesn't work like that. Okay. Everybody's busy. So if you're going to ring me and you want to know that I am likely to have these particular issues, or trigger something in me that says, okay, that's something worth thinking about. That's something that I hadn't thought about, and that's something that could help me.
Yeah, I think understanding our customers and getting in their minds comes with the experience and working with customers along the journey. But yeah, there are generally 2, 3, 4 problems that they have in your space. If you can figure out what they are, it does make a big difference in a conversation, and how you address them, and how you look to solve those is probably then how you frame your product and offering and your marketing. So it's all driven back to the problems that they have.
Now, one of the things that we really stress is that you need to talk to your customers. And you need to talk to your customers on a regular basis. And you need to find out what it is that you're doing that they find really valuable. Because very often we find that what you might think is valuable, they don't necessarily think is valuable. And what you don't think is valuable, they really think is valuable. And I'll give you an example. So one of our clients sells into the CRM space, and his market is about 200 companies in Australia. So it's a very narrow market. And he did this exercise somewhat reluctantly. He said, oh, look, I don't necessarily want to ring him and find out exactly what it is that, we do well, because, all sorts of cans of worms might open up. And that's very often a common fear. It's a fear thing. But he did. And what he found was that his clients actually said, look, one of the things that you do that we really appreciate is that you challenge us. You don't just we say, oh, look, listen, we want you to make this modification to the CRM, and we want to do this, this, and this. You don't just go, okay, yes, 3 bags full, let's do this. We actually challenge us as to why we're doing this, and maybe this is a better way. And we really appreciate that. Now, he didn't think that was important until he asked.
There you go. Okay, so, and I get that from customers. They have concepts, ideas, but they generally want feedback, they want support, and even understanding from a business perspective, not just from a technology perspective. You're dealing from a tech, as you mentioned, just build it and just help them and say yes, but effectively it's been made from a business decision. So we need to understand why they're making it, what problem we're solving, and then, like you said, there could be a different.
Well, this is the other thing. We, a lot of our clients when they come to us, they deal with technology. And therefore, they try and sell into the IT department, the CTO. And I'm going, hang on, this is not a technology problem. The business buys something because the business has a particular problem to solve. And you need to elevate this out from a technical level into a strategic level. What is the business strategy that this thing is going to solve? And you need to also have the wherewithal to be able to talk to the business in language that the business actually relates to. So you've got to be able to take your technical concept and being technical. And, I'm an engineer by background. So, we tend to get very technical, and we talk about the technical stuff, and we vomit all over our clients with all of that. But the business doesn't care about that. The business cares about a particular business problem and how you're going to solve this. And the technology needs to just work.
Yeah, the technology is a tool, is all you're saying. You're selling a solution.
The technology is a tool. That's all it is. But technologists love to sell technology.
That's what they know. That's how they speak.
That's what they know. Exactly.
Yes.
And that's a huge mistake to make.
Yeah. We really want to distill it down to what are the key problems, like you said, we're solving, but from a business perspective. And it isn't that easy coming from a technical background, because you seem to find technical problems that you're solving too as a technologist. There's something to be aware of. We have conversations with many people, and they generally find technical problems and then build products to solve technical problems in a business, not from a strategy as to how that's going to support the business, what we're actually solving that a business can't solve right now, and what this tool is actually filling a gap in. I think that's probably some things that people need to think about when they're selling tools. And like you said, selling to the CTO is probably on 95% of cases, it might be the last person to go to. They should giving you the tick of approval from, yes, technology is sound to solve the problem that we're looking to solve within the business unit, not from just this technology is sound that's taken on, because it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't work that way, but by the same token, you've still got to involve the CTO and all of those sorts of people relatively early in the process, because otherwise you're going to get their noses out of joint.
Because you're walking over their backyard.
Yeah.
Yes, if you're in their backyard, because they're the ones that are meant to be bringing these solutions to the business. So I would agree with that.
Yeah, or they will effectively go slow, when it comes to implementation, etc. And the other thing that, especially in a multi-stakeholder sale, you've got to understand that you've got to involve the users as well. I'll give you an example out of my corporate career where a major SAP deal, they've been working on this thing for 2 years, as in implementing SAP. And they had 100 people, hived off in this office. They spent a huge amount of money and decided that they were going to cut this thing over from test to live production overnight, over a weekend. Monday came along. Nobody in those 2 years, believe it or not, had talked to any of the users that processed orders.
Oh, well. I say that was
That
a
would've
recipe
went
for a
well.
successful turnover.
That was a recipe for very successful implementation. So Monday came along. This very large organization couldn't actually process an order end to end, and the users just went, "That's it. We're not using this thing," and 2 years worth of work went down the drain.
Say that many a time. I think, any solution, we have to engage users. That's step one. But I think, when you're selling product in, users are pivotal. We want to understand how they're currently operating, what their current challenges are, because your technology, if you're putting it in, will probably create more challenges for them, more heartache, more learning. So we have to guide them on that process too and understand them.
So they're the people that use it, not the managers. The managers are sometimes a couple steps removed from either the problem or the people.
That's right. And you could also have a bunch of users that are there, but the technology could threaten them in some way. So they're not going to use it. Or if it's, for argument's sake, a unionized shop, the union might say, "Hey, listen, this is not something that we want to do for whatever reason." Okay?
So multi-stakeholders, it's a relationship thing, but it's also understanding what are the key things. Understanding their problems, their needs, their wants, their desires across each of the stakeholders. What else might you do there?
You need to understand the particular personality types, what's motivating them. And the other thing that you need to be very cognizant of is you need to explain your value proposition to each person. And each person has to buy into that value proposition for him or herself. And you cannot make the mistake of thinking just because you've dealt with the organization in the past that they're going to buy the next thing. So I'll give you an example. So a client of ours, and this is not in the technology space, but they do refurbishment of major hospitals. And they had done 4 different jobs, multi-million-dollar jobs for this organization over a number of years. And they knew the major players. And a tender came up for another location. And so they put the tender in, and I said, "Okay, so who is on the decision-making panel?" They said, 3 of the people we've worked with over the years and they know us really well, but there's one person over here. He happens to be the local accountant, and we don't know anything about him. And I said, "Well, you'd better make sure that A, you find out exactly what's on this person's agenda, and B, you need to go through your tender line by line and explain the value in great detail in terms that this person will understand and relate to." They didn't do it. And they lost the tender. That was $5 million tender deal that they lost, even though they had done a number of jobs for this organization before. So it really highlights the point that you have to make sure that you need to know everybody on the decision-making panel and what their agendas are. And then you need to go through and explain in great detail in terms that they relate to, not terms that you relate to, because it's like your perception of value may not be their perception of value. You have to figure out what is valuable to them out of all of these things that you do. Which are the things that trigger them, and why? And then the question is, okay, so you ask the question, what's important about that particular thing? And they say, okay, this, and you say, okay, but that's really interesting. So tell me what's important about that, because you're really looking for a second and third order thing. It's not the first answer. And what you're looking for ultimately is some form of emotional buy-in, because we all, regardless of who we are and what we're buying, buy on emotion and justify with logic. So we make an emotional decision of some kind, and then we justify it with logic, either to ourselves, I justify this purchase, these were all the logical reasons I convinced myself, or I have to justify, a spouse, or I have to justify another person in the organization, or even my shareholders. So it's really important to understand that you have to give people both the logical and the emotional reasons to buy something.
In terms of, there's obviously different people and people make decisions differently. How does it affect, and how do we maybe pick up the way people think and make decisions? Because, I think having the same sales pitch to everybody doesn't really cut it. So you mentioned it, trying to understand what is important to them, but how might you frame something to someone that thinks more logically or someone that thinks more emotionally? How do we pick that up in a conversation?
Okay, one way is say, okay, have you ever bought this sort of thing in the past? Whatever it is, okay? How did they do it? What were the steps they went through? Now, they will tell you, depending on their language, they will tell you things like, they will either give you some sort of, procedure. I started here and I went here and I went here and I went here and I went here, A to Z. And okay, so they're really procedural and I need to know what this procedure is likely to be. Or they might say something like, look, I looked at this person and I looked at this 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 and I had all these different options. But I still came back to the first one. Okay? So some people are driven more by options. Some people are driven more by procedures. Some people are driven more by emotion and then they justify it with logic. Some people want more logic, but there will still be an emotional component. But the best way to find out is to just have a conversation and say, well, what's the process here? How did you make this decision in the past? And people will tell you. And then you need to be listening.
You need to listen well.
Listen well. And in our world, it's 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use them in that order.
I missed that, sorry.
2 ears and 1 mouth.
2
Use
ears
them in
and
that
1
order.
mouth. Yes, 1 mouth. I thought I heard 2 years and 1 month. Okay, how does that relate? But anyway,
no,
I wasn't listening well enough.
The other thing that we always say to people is, okay, when you're walking into a meeting with somebody, the number of times I've had to stop people taking their laptop, taking their presentation, taking their whatever, okay? Because the first thing, what do most people do, especially in the technical area? They take out their laptop, they open it up, and they say, let me show you my PowerPoint slides. I sat through one of these things a little while ago. The guy said, I have 100 slides. And I'm going, you're joking, right?
It's a long conversation.
It's a long conversation. And then they proceed to go through all of them from A to Z. You can't deviate. Okay? So my thing is, you've got to be the naked salesperson. You walk in there with absolutely nothing except a notebook. And in our case, we have a recorder. So we record the meetings. And I say to people, we record the meeting. That means that I can give you my full attention. And it also means that I can capture everything that's being said. Not one person in 20 years has ever objected. People say to me, you can't record the meeting. Well, sorry, I record the meeting. Okay?
So you don't take notes? Or you said you had a notebook?
I take notes,
okay.
just to clarify things. I will take notes, but I really want that recording so that I can go back and listen for nuances. Okay? It's not that I always listen to it, but I want that backup.
Have the backup there just in case. It's amazing what the world of a bit of a backup. So we started recording quite a bit on Teams, and just being able to go through things, especially when you're workshopping and consulting, just finding those, like you said, little nuances is really important. The little things that you may have not paid attention to at the time, because there's a lot going on in a conversation. So yeah, it does help quite a bit.
Sometimes it's not clear if a decision's actually been made in the meeting as well. Just the way the language that gets used sometimes.
So I find it, you got a little recorder you've been carrying around for quite a while then.
Different iterations of it, but yes.
Yeah. One of the things that always intrigues me is the type of personality types that might be salespeople. I find that everyone can have a different tactic. Everyone can do sales well in their own right. Is there a particular type of person that you find that is better attuned to the role, or can you have different variances on the role because being different personalities isn't a bad thing sometimes?
No. Okay. So there is a theory where salespeople are born, not made, and I'll give you a little bit of context to that. There's a guy called Derek Gatehouse, and he wrote a really interesting book on this subject. And he'd worked with some 30,000 different sales teams around the world, and he'd come to the conclusion that there were certain innate characteristics that we have. And those characteristics fit us for different types of sales roles. And so there are people who are very good at, say, opening conversations, but they couldn't close a deal to save their lives because they simply cannot get the person to say, okay, this is what we need to do next. They're very much the pleaser, not the advisor. There are people who can talk to, say, people on the shop floor, for example, but they can't relate to somebody at a higher social standing in their eyes. Okay, so if you were dealing with CEOs of larger organizations, you need to have somebody who is innately comfortable having those sorts of conversations at that sort of level, and not everybody can. Now, some people can have a conversation at that level and also relate to some people on the shop floor. Other people can only relate the bottom or the top. So you really need to know who you are targeting and have a person that fits that particular mold. Okay? There are other people who can create a need.
That's a good skill.
It's a good skill.
Creating needs.
And there are people who can only deal with an established need. Okay, so I know that you've got this particular problem, or you've told me you've got this particular problem, and I can solve it. Then there are other people who can sell a concept versus something that is really obvious. So selling cars or a house is obvious. Selling performance improvement is a concept.
Correct. Yeah, there's no guarantees of that, right?
No, there are no guarantees.
Yes.
Okay, so I'll give you a couple of examples. So one of the clients we work with, they've got a young sales guy who, and they're moving into a new environment. So they used to sell into tier 1. Now they've been told that they need to sell into the mid space technology company. And the young guy is very good at starting a conversation, and he's really personable, but he's a pleaser. Therefore, the conversations just don't go anywhere beyond, hey, look, you got some problems. Let's have a conversation about it, and let's have another conversation about it, and then let's have another conversation about it.
Talking a lot.
Talking a lot. Okay?
Yes.
And I said to the owners of the organization, he's good at that role, but he needs to hand over to one of you. As soon as he determines that there is a form of interest and there's something there, he needs to hand over to somebody who is good at advising and saying, okay, these are the things that you need to do. And eventually, let's shake hands and close the deal. Okay. There was another example where we worked with a pharmaceutical company where they had all of these reps who would basically phone up pharmacies every day and say, what do you want to order today? What do you want to order today? What do you want to order today? Bang, done, 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 done. Okay. But they had a particular rep who would phone up, and she would, with the frontline staff, have a 40-minute conversation. How's the weather, this, that, and the other. Okay.
Well,
so not many orders going through her.
No orders going through. So she was about to get fired. And I said, but hang on. You have 2 or 3 people who are responsible for opening up new accounts. They are the people who have to phone and make contact with the pharmacy owner, build that level of rapport, open the account, then hand it over to one of these people who just phone up every day. Okay. So by understanding her preference of pleaser versus advisor, she's a pleaser, we got her to open accounts, and within 2 to 3 months, she became one of their top performers. So it's not that, sometimes it's just a case of putting the right person in the right role rather than saying, okay, I'm going to shoehorn this person into this thing.
Yeah, that makes sense because everyone has different personality.
With our team too. There's certain people who are more tailored to a certain role, and you can't push them into a different one. It doesn't work.
No, it doesn't work. And that's part of what we do. When we work with clients, we say, okay, well, assuming that even if it's just the business owner, are they the right person for that particular role? And if you've got a sales team, one of the number of times we've seen salespeople come on board, they don't work. They, a year goes by, they haven't sold anything. You get the next one, the same thing happens. The next one, same thing happens. And you're going, well, why is this happening? It's usually because it's the wrong person in the wrong role. Or we've taken somebody who's really good at selling enterprise stuff, and we've tried to get them to sell something that's fast action, really quick.
Model. Yeah.
It's a very different sale.
Okay. So anyone listening, and I think I can speak for most businesses, are always looking to improve their sales in their business. What's a place that they might want to start? Is it process? Is it people? Is it problems they're solving? Is it marketing? Where do we generally start if you start a conversation around improving sales within a business?
Well, the first thing I would look at is are the right people in the right roles? That would be probably one of the fundamentals, because square pegs, round holes. And it's relatively easy to do. You just look at their results and you say, okay, well, who are they targeting and what are they doing and what are they saying? And then is the sales message, are you articulating the value? Do you even understand the value that you provide?
It's one of the, if you don't understand it, how are you going to explain it to anybody else? Yeah.
And sometimes it's really ironic, because it's the irony of expertise. You know, we're all very good at what we do, but it's very hard for us to explain it to somebody else. So we've got a client at the moment. They've been around 12 years and they're very, very, very good at what they do. And yet they did not recognize the value of what they did until we sat down with them and we went through all of these things. And then I even rang some of their clients, and their clients, you know, one of their clients who, major government department, said, listen, I would hire them personally out of my own money. They're that good.
That's a great recommendation.
It's a great recommendation. And that just enables the person to say, okay, well, this is some real value here. But now I intrinsically know my own value, because the first sale is always to myself. Now I have to be able to articulate that value in terms that a client would understand.
You said it, you hit it on the nail on the head there. First sale is always to yourself. If you can't sell yourself on the services or the products that you're selling, and you don't see or perceive value, you can't sell anybody.
No.
If you're not convinced, you don't have the confidence to say that this is going to help anybody, then you're pretty much barking up the wrong tree. So
yeah, that's right.
That's there. You believe the bottom of your heart that it's going to serve me, not them. But that's a different conversation. But you still have to have some confidence in something. So it's very important. Confidence in what you're doing, what you're selling, I think, is probably number one, especially from where I see it from the selling proposition.
Yeah. So when we work with an organization, we say that there are basically three pillars to growth. You've got to have sales. Sales is number one. But to get sales, you also have to be able to prospect. Because you've got to be able to reach out to the target market. You've got to be able to identify the target market. You've got to figure out what that target market is looking for. And you've got to be able to underpin that with your marketing system. And your marketing system basically nurtures your potential client and then nudges them along so that when they're ready to buy, they actually contact you. And this is something else that most people don't realize how many touches it can take to bring somebody on board and how long it could possibly take. Most people give up after the first or second touch.
Yeah.
Not interested?
I've had clients that we've communicated with for over 5 years before they became clients. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just sometimes it takes a long time. And that's not communicating every week. It's just a touching every once in a while, just being present, putting on a newsletter, bits and pieces. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I think our record was 10 years. Somebody had been on our list. They'd been to something. They'd been to a seminar that we'd run. They'd been on our list. We communicated with them once every week, just normal newsletter. 10 years later, they rang up and they said, hey, listen, we want to do something. We're ready. Okay. Now they're ready. I've had other people who have been on our list for 2 years suddenly ring up and say, hey, listen, we've got a problem with the sales team. Can you help us? We've seen all of your stuff, but it doesn't take 2 years. We had somebody off LinkedIn. He watched a couple of videos and he said, look, really vibe with the videos. Can you help us? There you go. So it's a gamut.
Yeah, it's all about timing. It's are they ready? And are they the 3 to 5%? And they're not everyone's ready to say.
Not everybody is ready. And
yes, right now.
The other thing that we really stress with people is that there's the 90-day rule. And the 90-day rule says that on day 91, if somebody comes along with a product or service that the potential client could be interested in, even though you provide that, they will forget that you provided and go with the other person.
It's I've seen that before in my own experience. Yes, because if you disappear, you're easily forgettable. Everyone's very busy. Everyone's doing their own thing, and in their own mind. And when the problem actually comes up, if someone's there to solve that problem and reaches out at that right point in time, you'll have that conversation with them. I've bought things like that myself. Yes, it's very interesting.
Yeah, and we've seen that time and time again. And I think just recently we were talking to a client, and they said, they hadn't contacted. They'd done a number of jobs for a particular organization. They hadn't contacted them for 3 or 4 years, because jobs would only come up every 3 years or 4 years. And one day they happened to see a work anniversary on LinkedIn. Sent the guy a message, and he said, Oh, thank you for the congratulations. Oh, by the way, we've got this tender out and your name isn't even on it.
Oh.
And, please put in a bid
on it.
now.
Yeah.
And they won. They won the tender.
Just because of that reach out. Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? You hear those stories that happen quite a bit. It's happened with myself too. You get people that used to work in one business, moved on, and then just send a LinkedIn reach out, similar type of thing, and then, we've got something actually. So it's quite crazy how it can come. It's all about, are they in the 3 to 5%? And 95% of them aren't, which is what people need to be clear on. 95% of people that you're communicating to are not ready. So I think that's a good context to take away, and just saying you need to have a process and procedure in play. And I think to market, to communicate, to nurture, as I said.
And the right messages. And also realize that, so sometimes, somebody could be in a contract. So they're not going to buy until that contract comes up for renewal. But then you need to know when that contract is going to come up for renewal, and therefore target them at that time.
Uh-huh. There's plenty of good takeaways today, Rashid. Anything else you'd like to add before I wrap up? I think it's been a good little takeaway from all the things sales, and then understanding people in the right roles. I think it's one of the big takeaways from my perspective.
Well, I'd say the biggest thing that people need to realize is what's in it for me, as in what's in it for them, personally as well as for the organization, because we all make decisions based on our own personal agenda, whether we admit it or not. It's better just to be aware of it.
On that note, let's wrap it there, Rashid. It's been a pleasure talking about all things sales and a little bit of marketing and how they come together. Because, yes, they are two sides of the one coin, as you said. They are very similar, very aligned. And one of my other big takeaways from today's chat was, and I wrote a note, marketing, raise awareness and warm somebody up. That's what it's for. And it's still a sales conversation at mass, which is what you mentioned, which gave me a bit of context around how we might be marketing. So thanks for sharing. If anyone wants to find out more about you and what you do from a consulting perspective, how might they reach out?
Okay, they can certainly reach me at our website, revealedresources.com. And we have a wealth of free material there. So we have documents on 12 strategies to help you market yourself. That's been one of our mainstays for years. We've got documents on how to have better sales conversations. We have hundreds of articles on marketing, sales, strategy, leadership, because leadership is all about helping people make decisions.
I would agree with that. It's guiding and sometimes inspiring them to make decisions, depending on what you're selling, right, or where you're coming from. So, in the show notes, we'll share everything out about yourself and also LinkedIn profiles, etc. So, thank you, Rashid, for joining the Dev Ready podcast. Hope everyone listening got something out of it from a sales perspective. But jump on his website and have a bit of a look at some of the content material there. Thanks, Rashid.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, Anthony.